Hello, and welcome to the Mime Radio Show. I'm Karen Hoyer.
And I'm James Donlin. And here we are, Karen, in season 4. It's been quite a journey for us. Today we have a very fascinating and very interesting and creative, talented guest. But before we do that, let me mention the man behind the black field on the other side of our images, Michael Diaz, our producer. And we all know if we make a mistake, he'll save us. And if we do something that's a little insulting to him, he'll take us off the air. So we're indebted to him.
We better behave. We better behave, James.
That's right.
Tell us about our guest.
All right. Today, we have a very talented man, one of the foundations of mime, particularly in the Decru technique, Thomas Leabhart. Let me tell you something about him. Tom Leabhart is recognized as one of the world's foremost authorities and practitioners of Decru technique. After growing up in Pennsylvania, Amish country, and Florida, graduating from college, Tom received a Fulbright grant to study with Etienne Decru in Paris for 1 year. However, for 3 more years, he continued working as Decru's teaching assistant and translator, and eventually returned to the U.S. to teach at various schools, including the University of Arkansas, Ohio State University, and the influential Valley Studio in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Tom began teaching at Pomona College in 1982 and continued there for 40 years. At Pomona, he directed student actors, authored 4 books, founded, edited, and published 30 issues of Mime Journal, toured internationally to Europe, Latin America, and Asia with 5 one-person presentations, and taught Decru technique in Europe and Latin America with Eugenio Barba's ISTA, the International School of Theater Anthropology. Tom hastens to add that none of this would have been possible without his wife of 51 years, Sally, whose invaluable work contributes to his theater pieces and publications in every aspect. So with that, let's welcome in Thomas Leabhart. Ta-da!
Hello, Tom.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Tom, you've had such an amazing influence on the mime world. For my entire career, you've been one of the people that I've looked up to. So we're just really thrilled that you're here and that you can tell us a little bit about your experiences. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've known Tom. I wouldn't say we were friends, but we've been in the same place at the same time. We were definitely acquaintances and part of the same tribe. But I first met Tom and saw his work in 1974 at the International Mime Festival in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And since that time, Tom has been a pillar of especially the Decru technique.
So, Tom, we always like to start by asking performers how they prepare. And I'm really interested in you letting us know what you do to prepare before a performance. What do you think about right before you go on stage? But also, since you've had such a long career as a teacher, how do you approach that with your students? How do you share with them a good way to prepare to go out on stage?
So I think that we can teach a little bit of theater history at the same time that we're teaching performance skills. And I think of and tell students about Eleonora Duse, the late 19th, early 20th century Italian actress, who is a rival of Sarah Bernhardt. And a lot of people have heard of Sarah Bernhardt who haven't heard of Eleonora Duse. But she had quite a long and fascinating career that students like to hear about. And she had a ritual before going on. She would meditate sometimes for as long a time as hours. She would meditate on a theme, oh, let me be empty, let me be empty, let me be empty, was her thought. And this thought was kind of a wave or a kind of a crest that took her out onto the stage. now jumping ahead to 1970, I'm a student at DeCruz School, teaching assistant and translator, as Jim pointed out. And we get a phone call from a French Cultural Center in one of those little cities outside of Paris. And I don't know if it was Rennes. I've forgotten, I've misplaced the name of the city, but we were to do a lecture demonstration, and I was to perform the carpenter. Mm-hmm. We're behind the stage, behind the curtain. And as the hour approaches, we begin to hear louder and louder murmuring and scuffling of feet and unwrapping of candy wrappers and so on the other side of the curtain. And DeCruz came over to me and took me by the arm and walked me back and forth behind that closed curtain. And he said, "Not to worry, my boy, not to worry. You can perform very well or poorly. No one will ever know the difference. They're imbeciles. They are all imbeciles." So there are these different approaches, historical. I love the Katakali, when for 24 hours before the performance starts, the person is allongé, the person is lying down, sort of all covered up in dirt, as if dead, except the face is sticking out. And these wonderful, enormous crowns and excroissance are made so that when it's time for the performance, the actor who is already in a different state of mind, is helped to his feet and comes slowly up and is kind of reborn into a new place. So there are all of these different ways to look at those moments. And I think that I do something, depending on the day, something between the Katakali and DeCruz and Eleonora Duse.
So did DeCruz really think that the audience was his concept of the audience was that they were imbeciles? And do you have that concept of the audience?
That was my question. Like, what's what does that body of humanity in front of the performer mean to you?
Let's see. I don't think the audience is an imbecile. There are imbeciles. The thing about performing is that you get to try something out. And if it works, that's good, thank you. And if it doesn't work, you can sort of go on to the next thing, the next version or the next iteration. So I don't think I ever tried thinking that the audience really was, because I actually knew some people who were going to be in that audience at Rennes, and I knew that they were quite perceptive people. I like Eleonora Duse. I think that's
so I guess we're talking about sort of a little bit about the dynamic between an audience and a performer, and knowing that your specialty is DeCruz, which we'll talk about a little later, one of the foundations of modern mime. I'm just wondering, from your perception, from your background as a DeCruz practitioner, how would the DeCruz person think of the audience in general? I mean, is there a fourth wall? Is there not a fourth wall? Are they imbeciles? Are they not imbeciles? Because the master himself, Etienne DeCruz, told you they were imbeciles. I'm just wondering what your thoughts would be in terms of that. It's a complicated question.
I'll tell you what, if we could allow this wonderfully complex question to hover in the air, and if we could go forward, this happens a lot when I don't know the answer to a question. I tell the students, could we come back to this in 24 hours?
Yeah.
When I've had a chance to think about it. Of course, we don't have 24 hours, but
no.
We could come back to it in 24 minutes, or we could come back to it in a little bit. But I'm sure, DeCruz every Friday night gave these wonderful lectures. And he would launch out into the deep. He would start on this, and someone would ask him that, and he would go have all of these different things. and they were all, and you'd say, how is he ever going to make sense out of all of these questions? And somehow, just about 5 minutes before the end of the hour, he'd reach up and pull all of these things down and weave them together. So let's see if we can't be Decru, but maybe we can try a Decru trick and see if it'll work.
Yeah.
So that's probably the best time now for you to tell us a little bit, especially for people that don't have any exposure to Decru technique. What is his system of technique? What is his philosophy? And in a nutshell, if you can. Of course, we will refer them to your many writings about him, but just a little bit of the essence of who Decru was and how he affected the theater world.
Yeah, and how you were attracted to that. I mean, to get a Fulbright, to go to study with him, what attracted you to his style of performance or his magic, you know?
In the 1960s, the big thing that everyone had on their mind was, how can we stay out of the war in Vietnam? And the only way that we knew how to do it, or thought very much about, was let's see, what's the best way to approach that? There were unofficial ways, there were official ways to do it, but the official way to do it would have been to stay in graduate school. And so I went to graduate school at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. My undergraduate degree had been in visual arts. In graduate school, I studied theater and dance. And I had a wonderful teacher from the Humphrey Weidman troupe by the name of Eleanor King. And Eleanor King had studied with Decru in a summer workshop. And there was a film available from Waco, Texas, from Baylor University in Waco, Texas. Good. And she somehow got her hands on this videotape, not videotape, but film, 16 millimeter film, and showed it to the class. And she said, now, I don't think that he's a very nice person, but I think that he's somebody that you'll read about in the history books, and that you should have a look at anyway. So she showed this film, and I transfixed. I thought this was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. And I think my jaw must have dropped. I think my eyes glazed over. And we got to the end of the film, and I just knew that's what I was going to do. It was one of those, what a coup de foudre, struck by lightning.
And you had never, it sounds like you hadn't done much performing for an audience in any way up to that point. If you say visual art.
I had, yes, visual arts, but then some dance also. Yeah. So I'd done a little bit of performing, but somehow there was something about Decru's quality in this film. Now you can see that film very easily. If you look on the internet, Etienne Decru video, it's not a video, but I think you could write Google in Etienne Decru video, Waco, Texas, and it'll come up. Or Baylor University, and all of that wonderful film chopped up into bits because they were little segments. Now, I've lost what your question was. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you were talking about visual art. I know we're going to interview Leonard Pitt at some point, who studied, of all things, advertising, graphic arts and advertising earlier. So I'm wondering if there was a sense of visual art in Decru technique, or a sense of the geometry. We've all heard about this, of course, in terms of the base of Decru work. The geometry of the space, the physics of the space, in a visual sense as well as an energy sense. So I'm thinking that you had a connection to that, that drew you to his work in Paris.
Yeah. There's certainly a lot to be said for that. Decru loved advertising art. He loved to see the posters in the show, and how the graphic artist was able to reduce a complex idea to a simple gesture. one simple
Yeah.
gesture.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Surely. Yeah.
so I think there's a lot to be said there. There's a lot to be discovered in that. One of the difficulties, this is maybe a joy and a little bit of sorrow too, about having reached a certain age, is that a question that before would have opened up 2 or 3 hours of monologue now leads one instead to think, where to which string to start on.
Oh,
And then,
yes. Yeah.
but you also know that it's really much more complex than that.
Yeah.
It's in my memory, whenever Decru, a practitioner or a performance or an article was addressed or was representative of Decru, there always was feedback. I'll call it feedback or reaction. It seemed like whatever it was that he was doing, whether they were the students or the an expert like yourself who learned the technique, that there was always energy that wanted to continue, and people wanted to talk about it, whether it was, everybody always had opinions about what the group meant and so forth.
Yeah.
Don't you agree?
Well, the thing is that he meant different things on different days in different situations. And I think to try to pin him down is a mistake. And to try to say, this is what Decru thought, and this is what he thought on which day. This is what he thought. For example, he went for a very long time, before I was his student, but for a very long time, and everything started on the ground, flat on your back on the ground, as if you were buried. And that was the beginning. And whatever the exercise was, you had to make your way to your feet, up to your feet, and then began this whole process of doing something else. So after, I don't know how many decades, maybe a decade and a half or two decades of starting everything on the ground, he said, well, enough of that. We tried that. Now the zero position is heels together, standing, arms to the sides, and take it from there. So,
and it's really interesting too, because he had such a long career of teaching that there are many generations of people that studied and then went on to be teachers, and they each had maybe a different experience with him as a teacher.
Yeah. I'm working now via Zoom with a small group of intermediate advanced Decru students. And we're learning The Washerwoman, which is a classic 1930s Decru composition, which he revived several times thereafter, after the 1930s, one time with me. And so we're learning this sequence, and it's kind of funny because we say, are we going to do the 1974 part there? And then we're going to go back to this other version there. And each student is kind of building his or her own structure, but composed of different parts, which is the way he would work in rehearsal. We would begin the composition off stage with a walk coming on, head turn, body turn, first position, ta, and then we would begin and we would begin this composition. And we did that for months. And then he says, oh no, we're not going to do the walk on anymore. We understand that. You're there, it doesn't matter. Start in the middle, and the first moment is that. So there's a lot of ability to change, ability to redefine and yes.
I had a question. So now you just made a vocalization, a percussive vocalization in tandem with your memory of the movement. Now I remember watching you teach 40 years ago, and you had this melodic vocalization that would accompany some of the exercises you were teaching the class. And it's interesting because when I perform, I hear percussion in my head too. Almost like an animated film. There's these, these sounds that happen. So I'm just wondering, and you did it there. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that comes, how that musicality comes to this work of Decru? Was that an important part of his fabric? This sense of sound and music,
Yeah.
in terms of the movement and so forth.
He loved word origins, and he spent half of every day on word origins, and he had dictionaries, and he had stacks of notes, and he had stacks of books, and hunched over his desk with his quill pen and his ink and writing lists and lists of words. And so he would take us back to the origin of words a lot of times. And he said, enchanté is enchanted, means singing inside. And the whole idea, the gesture, ta, and how could that be colored? Could be colored with a tuck at the beginning, or it could be colored with a tuck at the end, or it could be colored with tucks in the middle.
And you call them talks.
TOC, yeah, talk.
Yeah, and that was his word. That was his vocabulary to describe.
Yeah. And the vibrato coming from muscular respirators. We've got biceps, pectorals, and buttocks, and we can start with a trembling in a certain part, and that trembling takes the gesture out, and we get a kind of this vibrato, which is carving on the retina of the spectator's eyes, we hope.
That's very interesting. Can you describe the atmosphere of a typical Decru class, maybe from the time when you were a student? Can you give the viewers, the listeners, an idea of what that would have been like to be in his class? A typical day in the student.
What was so wonderful was that he taught, of course, in his own home, this little cottage in Boulogne-Billancourt, and this little cottage at the back of the garden. And the students would arrive not more than 5 or 8 minutes before class, because the door would be not open, but 5 minutes before, open the door and go in, and take off your shoes and put them around the pot-bellied stove that was in the kitchen. And if Madame Decru were there, she would be sitting at the table, and she would mark you, present. If she wasn't there, if she was, for example, out shopping, when she got back, she would take her roll sheet, and by judging from the shoes, she would be able to know who was here, and she would mark the roll that way. So you arrived, took your shoes, left your shoes around the stove, went upstairs to the changing room, and the changing room was quite a small, that we're talking minuscule here. When you're talking about one of the great thinkers and doers of 20th century theater, you think of big state supported studios and workplaces. But no, this was really where somebody lived, and a person of extremely modest means lived. So we went up into this changing room, which I often thought of it was like the United Nations. There was a little group of Spaniards over there, and everybody changing clothes, hanging up their clothes, getting ready. And when you heard the bell, boom, 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 downstairs, through the kitchen, down another flight of stairs into the basement. Cold, damp basement, blue, bright blue.
Bright blue.
Yes. Oh, the floor was blue, the walls were blue, the ceiling was blue. The ceilings were quite low. Dean Fogel talks about Decru's mentioning that when they first moved to the house, that he and Madame Decru went into the basement every day and spent a long time shoveling dirt into bags, which every night, once it was dark, they would take these up onto the street and leave for the trash man. This was days of daily trash delivery and more dirt and up, until finally there was enough space that a student could raise their hand and not touch the ceiling. So
Wow.
it was a small space. It was a small.
Wow.
Interesting. How big? How many meters or feet would you say the space was?
Oh, that's. I'll tell you what. This is a great question to ask Lenny Pitt
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he'll hop up and mark it off for you. So on one end there was an electric heater that was supposed to heat up the space. Didn't do a very good job. There were these little windows at the top of the wall so that you could see anybody walking by, you could see ankles or feet. So that it was that kind of, you had this feeling of being quite separated. Decroux joked a lot about this. He said, never forget, dear students, that the first Christians were also meeting in the catacombs. And and what was the spirit? It could be anything. The spirit of the past could be jovial. It could be depressed. It could be melancholic.
What was that? What was the sense in the room when was he in the space when you were there before you, or did he enter like an entrance?
He was waiting at the bottom of the steps, and he had over his arm ropes, and there were green ropes for the beginners, for the ancien élève. I don't know if they must have been raw rope, sort of brownish tan color, for the beginners. Then for the sort of intermediate students, they were green. And for the teachers or assistants at that time, there were gold ropes. I still have my gold ropes.
So these are literally small woven rope-like strings.
Rope. Yeah. And the first exercise was done with that rope. So he would hand, and he would have certain things that he would say, and you would respond according to how he said. But it was basically, hello, how are you? And you would say, very well, thank you very much. And he would give you the chord, and you would take the chord, and a whole sort of singing back and forth that happened. Then the first exercise started with the classical. Whoa. Whoa. So the first exercise was to make you into the prow of the ship. This wonderful forward energy coming out. So, and then he would tell jokes, he would sing, always singing. If you remember singing in my class, I can't teach without singing. When I started teaching for Decroux, with Decroux, I had this interesting event that about singing that occurred. The first day that I taught, I went upstairs afterward, and Decroux was in the kitchen and said, "How did it go? How did it go?" I said, "It was okay. It was okay." Of course, it had been terrible. The second day, same thing. He was there to sort of encourage. And the third day, I finally was able to relax enough and that I was able to sing the exercises. And when I got to the top of the steps on the third day, he said, "Hey, we, and how was it? How was it today?" And I said, "I was good." He said, "I could tell you were singing." So enchanté, singing within, the vibrato that goes out into the space and captures the very last person at the end of the
That's very beautiful, Tom. That's a beautiful idea.
I should have arranged this differently. I should have known that I would be hopping up, but that's okay. You can still see it. So from here, here, up, out, fingers on the back of the neck, and the hands go, whoa. There I am casting my net out. And I come from here, back here, the energy in the sacrum, and draw it forward, draw it forward. Throwing it out. And then eventually you can do this Doesn't have to be large. I can do it. I can do that if I remember. I can do it when I'm sitting here talking to you. The energy comes up, out, and
Did you ever get discouraged? I mean, we all know that the technique is very rigid. And when I say rigid, I don't mean rigid. I mean there's a lot of discipline involved. This sounds so different than what you would have encountered at University of Arkansas, let's say. I'm just saying, did you ever question yourself at some point that you couldn't measure up, or what was happening, or what kept you for 4 years continuing on this journey?
That work was so beautiful that, of course, I had moments of depression. I had moments of depression because after the first year, I had the Fulbright grant the first year, but the second, third, and fourth years, I was English teaching half the day, working at DeCruz half the day, commuting on the subway at least 3 hours a day, sometimes 4 hours a day commuting on the subway. So it was a very complex and I lived in a maid's room with a tiny little window, and out the window, if you positioned yourself just right, balancing on a chair, you could see the Eiffel Tower somewhere over there. So, of course, we got depressed. We got, terrible. But there was nothing better than the work. And why? Because he had this enthusiasm and love for this work. And for him, it was a sense of discovery every day. Even if, he had a flash of anger or a flash of disappointment or something, his thought, why can't you do this after, 6 weeks, you still can't do this exercise. Why can't you, there was a little bit of all of that there. And then there was the joy in the work. And so I
was going to say, how were you promoted? When I say promoted, how were you allowed to continue into a second year? I mean, what kind of standards had to be met? And then your transition into an assistant and a translator, how did that come about? What was the arc of, or the steps of, to continue? How did they present themselves?
Gosh, it just sort of happened. There was no official paper printed that said you do 6 months of this and then 2 weeks of that. And no, it's all very familial, and it's very sort of natural way that evolved.
Tom, I want to ask you a question because of the exposure that I've had to the DeCruz technique from studying short classes. I've just had exposure, like classes with you or from Daniel Stein or with Bert Houle or Sophie Wibot, and the vocabulary is what has been given to me first. The whole structure of how you analyze movement, which is, the different parts of the body and how each of those parts move. Your description now of how you walk into the class and do this beautiful exercise is very different from the DeCruz that was taught to me by the teachers that I was exposed to, and most likely because it was a very short. But this system of analyzing the movement is also like an intricate part of his legacy. Can you talk a little bit about that, the vocabulary itself?
Well, DeCruz himself was such a volcano waiting to erupt. I mean, he had this tremendous energy and this tremendous sense of carving through the space.
I imagine he did erupt occasionally too, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Oh, well, yes, of course, that too. Yeah. That too. That he said he needed to teach us a technique so that we would have the possibility to have that same energy without it killing us.
Oh.
One day in a rehearsal, he looked over at me, and I was sort of looking maybe a little tired or disappointed or something at that moment. And he said, don't worry. Now this is like plumbing. We're just doing, and plumbing is not very interesting. We're just putting in the pipes. We're doing the soldering. We're making arrangements. It's boring and tiring. And then he looked over. But someday, I promise you, you will have water, hot water flowing through these pipes.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So he's told the same story at other times with electricity.
Mm-hmm.
He said, if I hand you a ball of electricity, it's going to burn you.
Mm-hmm.
If we carefully make some circuits, some circuit breakers, some fuses, we construct a system, and then we let it flow. Then we let it flow. So he likes to do this. I can do this gesture here. You see the edges. You always saw the edges, but you also got the idea. But it was the way he taught it. Now, I know there are some teachers who teach the energy first and then teach the geometry, and some people teach the geometry first and then teach. It doesn't matter. You have to do it all sooner or later.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but the analysis of the movement is very fascinating to me, and it's different from learning dance, where you're in dance you're learning a way to move, but in the Decru technique you're learning like all the possibilities of movements, like all this sort of like there's like you start thinking and analyzing the way that you're moving in everyday life, and you start to observe more deeply how movements and what the movements mean, and how the slight difference in a movement can mean something totally different. That to me is a very fascinating part of the technique itself.
mm-hmm. Well, it's just like language. It's exactly the same thing. If you put an emphasis on the first word or the first syllable of the first word of the sentence, or where if you put it somewhere else, you put the accent somewhere else, you put the quality, it completely changes the meaning of what it is you're saying. So, so Decru was a great. This is ironic, n'est-ce pas? That somebody, Decru spent a lifetime working on silent art, was so influenced by speech, by diction, by the exact meaning of words, the origin of words. All of that was part of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked a lot about Decru himself, and I think it's time to talk a little bit more about you, perhaps, Tom. But I think in the last analysis, maybe you could speak to, because you did return to the USA, and you have this long career, imparting this knowledge to others. But what, in the last analysis with Decru's work, what do you think the resonance is? Like, why would someone still be interested today, in 2023, as opposed to 1970 or 1975, 1965? What is the resonance, do you think, of this technique? Because it's still revered and saluted to this day.
Well,
or what's the complexity of continuing that legacy, in today's world? It's very complicated.
Yeah, for 4 years of study daily for a technique like Decru's technique, even then seemed like a long time for some people. For me, it was just right. 4 years was just right. But for some people, 4 years was an impossible thought. Nowadays, things have sped up to such a point that if a person can do a 2-week workshop without having to fly off to Atlanta for a grandmother's funeral or the things that people, 2 weeks is a huge workshop these days.
That's right.
And it's going to take longer to do this particular technique, but the traditional forms are that way. If you go to India and you want to study any of that traditional classical music, Indian classical music, any of those classic dance forms, if you want to study almost any in Japan, I mean, it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime of learning in Japan.
Do you feel this word classic is a stumper sometimes? I like to use the word neoclassic. The past informs the present, which informs the future, which is actually informed by the past, which, we couldn't have the future without the past, blah, blah, blah. You can get into all these esoteric metaphysical thoughts, correct? But this word classic, what's your feeling yourself about that in itself? Like, where does that fit? I know a lot of younger generations might have misgivings about the word classic. How can we describe? Well, you wouldn't be here without that, and the future won't be here without blah blah blah.
Yeah, I don't really know what to call corporeal mime.
Uh-huh.
There was a critic once who wrote about a show that I was doing with a group of students, and he said very perspicaciously, he said, how can there be incorporeal mime? So, in other words, isn't all mime corporeal mime? And he's right, all mime is corporeal mime. So what we call it, I don't know what we call it. I think Decru technique is a good thing to call it. Mm-hmm. But then it's going to be so richly flavored by every different person who studied.
True.
So I have different ways to go at the crew's work, and I'm sure it looks different than some of my colleagues.
Well, let's just take,
we have
let's take, for instance, that you're working at Pomona College with these theater students, and you've had that position working with theater students and sharing Decru technique with them. What do you feel the importance is for these modern actors to have exposure to that technique and that sort of inspired energy and knowledge of the body?
For most of the 40 years that I taught at Pomona, my best students were not theater students. Mm. I had students from religious studies who did wonderful work. Math students. I had mathematical students who were superb, or even just literature or people who were interested. Mm-hmm. So the occasional theater student who was interested, see, they were already 30 years ago already working on a much tighter timeline. Mm-hmm. So we're walking down the street one day and never having heard of this play, and in 4 weeks, we have a leading part and we're performing it on the stage. So it's just a different way of working, a speedier mm-hmm. way of working. Mm-hmm. On a bad day, you might say, oh, it's a microwave. On a better day, you might say, we have to learn to be concise. We have to learn how to focus our energy. Mm-hmm. So I think that corporeal mime, as Decru taught it, was there was always room in the class for people who were not movers, people who were not typical body types. We had heavier people, or we had thinner people, or we had taller people, or we had all sorts of people. It wasn't as if there was a type that you had to, or like for gymnastics, you have to be a certain, yeah. So that was part of the work that I admired and responded to quite strongly, I think.
Mm. And then you came back to the USA. Were you, when you were finished with those 4 years, were you expecting to be a performer, or was expecting to be a teacher, or did you find value in both of those? Like, my personal belief is you can't perform without being a good teacher, and part of the mission of an artist is a performer is to be a teacher. That's what art is. It's about communication and handing down the rituals, correct? So what were you thinking when you returned to the USA after that period of time in Decru, and what did you do?
I was so thrilled to have a job. I can't tell you. Sally and I thought, whoa, they're going to pay us to do this. I mean, it really, and of course, if you remember what salaries were like in 1972,
Right.
yeah, it was a very small salary, but we thought it seemed like $1 million a year to us.
Yeah, I remember my first job offer that was $6,000 a year to be a full
Yeah,
time
exactly.
professor,
Well,
and then 14,000 at another school I remember where I worked.
yeah, like crazy, wonderful, crazy.
Yeah.
So, what they were teaching us to do, I realize now, what they hired us to do was to be the movement person. There was a voice person, there was a movement person, there was a literature, dramatic literature person, etc. And so, and in the larger schools, there were more than that. But in fact, we've got to get the whole body moving, the whole body speaking, the whole body breathing. All of that has to happen in a way that's coherent and makes sense. And how you do that in 4 years, I don't know.
So did you feel that the university teaching was an umbrella? I mean, I know I thought that it would allow you to be free as an artist if you could become a professor at some institution. So it
Yeah.
means that the teaching was very important to you, not just performing, but it seems like, one who teaches as long as you have, it finds the beauty and the importance of that action as an artist, that
Oh yeah. Oh
teaching
yeah.
artist. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, keeping the balance. So all of this writing that I've done, the editing and writing that I've done, that Sally and I have done, all of this is sort of like one more element that makes the picture complex and makes time management very complex. So
it's important to let everybody know, like, and I have my collection of all the mime journals.
Look at that.
Yeah.
That you have an incredible library of not just your own writing, but also things that you have edited, it's a legacy of writing about mime and movement that's amazing. That you, James, did you say 30 issues of Mime Journal? Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah.
I had to round it up. I think it's something like 28, or it's a lot, and I can't remember, and I couldn't find that number, so I just rounded it up to 30. But
it's a one of a kind endeavor, because I don't think there's been anything else like that in the last 50 years, and probably not before that ever in the history of theater. I mean, as a particular genre of theater, mime is, many people say mime is the source of theater, and we could talk about that for a long time. But
a long time,
quite accomplishment to have this. Why did you stop? I'm wondering, just the complexity of life, or what?
Hold on for just a second. I just happen to have this with me. I don't know.
Which one is that?
This is our latest endeavor.
Oh yeah.
Propos de Crew, Irving Craig. And it's just a thin little book. As you can see, it's a thin little book. It's available in hardback and also digital form.
Yeah, because
you say our endeavor. Who's the other?
Sally Garfield.
Yeah.
Sally
Garfield. Your wife. Yeah.
Yes. 51 years and
wow,
coming up.
Amazing.
Barbara Lee, who did this one on Capot School, was one of our guests. So,
wonderful! I haven't listened to those, because I'm going to listen to them now that I'm sort of more a master of my own time.
You're on the list, yeah.
Yeah, I have time to do that.
And some of the more recent ones you can access through the website too, right? They're like the digital version, right?
So this is not a mime journal. This is actually a Routledge, which is a kind of it's a publishing house, and mostly for colleges and university people. So,
well,
but at
we
any
will
rate,
make sure that there's a link on the website so people can
oh,
purchase.
good. Wonderful, wonderful.
Exactly.
So what I was going to say, though, about the Mime journals is the Mime journals you find on the internet in Amazon or Abe Books, but it's very expensive. They charge $40 for a volume sometimes.
Wow.
I saw one for, I don't know if it was $600 or something like that. I saw one supposedly rare. No, I have them. I have all the back issues. And if you
Why couldn't these be compiled into one volume? It seems like they're a great
well,
account of a time period, you know?
yeah, it would be quite a thick volume,
Yeah.
James. It would be kind of like that. So
Maybe there's, well, let's have 5 to a volume. Maybe there's 6 volumes, 5,
oh
6
yeah,
times 5.
yeah, maybe, yeah.
But that could be very interesting. I mean, there's a lack of that kind of thing that is very important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I do remember. I do remember as a young student when you were first starting out, and we were like, "Oh, there's another issue. It's like a quarterly review of the Mime Journal coming out."
Oh yeah,
it was so exciting.
We very quickly fell off the quarterly review and onto the occasionally published list.
Then you got the fatter volumes.
Then we got the fatter volumes. Yes, it were double issues and triple issues and all of that. Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's really a really remarkable accomplishment that you were able to bring that about and have that as your, shall we say, your legacy, right?
Well, that's one of the advantages of being in a university. Oh, they're here. It's that time.
Oh. Did you get a gift from the Mime Museum?
Do I open it up?
Yes,
yeah, of course.
This is your
now,
gift.
This is the way it arrived at my house with this little torn bit. And somebody was impatient and wanting to get in, but it didn't actually get torn all the way in. So
okay.
Maybe
well, you know, the Mime Museum collects all this detritus of all the different mimes throughout the years, and we are deacquisitioning and sending it back to you. So.
Oh, the Mime Museum.
Maybe you can read it out loud.
Yeah. Explain what you're reading there. Just.
Oh yes. We're on TV. Right?
That was very dramatic. That pause.
Yes, it was.
For people that don't have the video.
I'm trying to figure out what
does it say on the front?
Yeah, am I supposed to read this?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for joining us on the Mime Radio Show. Please accept this gift from the Mime Museum collection as a token of our thanks. The Mime Museum, Michael Diaz, curator. Souvenir number 64GLMZ. Description. When writing his summary and analysis of Etienne Decroux's words on mime, and later in 1997, writing a volume called Words on Decroux, Thomas Leabhart considered and then rejected many words. Several of his students at that time collected the words, thinking he might need them in the future. That's very, very good. I'm glad for that. The word collection ended up in the Mime Museum and are now being returned to Mr. Leabhart. And here.
Wow.
That's only a few of the words. We kept some of them.
Yeah.
Oh, you see, there's a whole world in each one of these words, isn't there? Mimeograph, mimesis, mimetic. Wonderful.
It's kind of ties in with your teacher being so involved with words in his dictionaries too, right?
Oh, yeah. And which dictionary are you using for this?
I have no idea. Those are from you, Tom. Those aren't from us. Your students collected all of those words, you know, and gave them to us.
Well, I'm going to study this, and I'm very grateful. This is a wonderful something to ponder. Something to ponder for sure.
That's why I said that was your approach, earlier, that let's wait, 24 minutes or 24 hours. You don't have to
Yes.
talk about it now.
Yeah.
Hey Tom, so we're all getting older. What how do you perceive the aging performer's body? How do we adapt? Like, do you still perform, or when was the last time you performed?
I think it's impossible to teach without performing and perform without teaching.
Right,
So the
right.
last time I performed was a week ago today.
And you're still teaching, correct? So and a good class is like a performance. So what's the key to an artist continuing their work with a healthy body and a healthy mind? Like, what are the tricks or the approaches one might use as a artist ages?
Gosh, I'm a great believer in naps.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. DeCreux was a great believer in naps.
You know,
How old was he when you were working with him? How old would he have been at that time?
He was in his 70s.
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both Avner and Michelle Matlock talk about naps that as a way to survive a performance ritual. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
But one has to adapt, don't they? I mean, does the crew technique allow for adaptation, or do you find that some moves are more difficult, or how do you find the spirit of the move or the core of the move, which is not compromised?
You just try, I guess. I don't know. I can't think of any response to you.
Just show up and things will happen. You got to show up.
Show up and things will happen. I'd love, of course, I used to do, it was insane, like 35 minutes of straight out movement with no pause, or more, 45 minutes more, an hour of movement with some of the solo pieces. Now I like to do lecture demos, and I like to just start with quotidian movement, ordinary movement, and just the most ordinary things, and see where they go. Where do we go from here with these movements?
Mm-hmm.
So that seems like it might be part of DeCreu's method, true, right? You were talking earlier about this journey, like you find the spark and then you see where it goes,
Yeah.
It even sounded like some of the classes were in that approach, like where are we going with this?
Yeah.
Should a performer keep going, or do you think there's a time when you have to stop? What's your feeling about that?
Well,
I mean, in one sense, we're lucky because, if you take a professional athlete, they stop at some point, right? But an artist, a movement artist, what drives us? What keeps us going, do you think? Should we keep going?
Yeah, I think it's a case by case. I think I think that's the answer. It's a case by case, because I think with each person it's quite different.
Mm-hmm.
So I think naps are good, probably chamomile tea. We could make a whole list of sort of new age or health food or whatever kind of things, or vitamin E. I mean, I don't know.
It seems like you take a lot of walks with your
wife.
I
love to walk.
And you travel a lot. I mean, it seems like your mind is still very much has a sense of movement about it,
Yeah.
mentally also.
I'm thinking more and more that I can't really continue burning up jet fuel at the rate that I have for the last 50 years. I think I have to stop that, because I think that I do care about the environment and I do care about clean air. And the fact that I live in one of the most polluted cities in the world does not mean that I need to just go on doing that.
Yeah.
Without thinking.
That sort of makes me, I had one question that I was really interested in talking to you about, and that's about social commentary, or using the arts for cultural or political criticism. And I know that has been a part of your work, that there are things that concern you in the world, as you just said, that you want to use your art to explore or to talk about. So what talk a little bit about that aspect of your work.
Well, for the first 10 years after leaving Decru, I did all of these like mini Decru attempts of things. I would perform the carpenter and the washerwoman, which he taught to me, and keeping it as strong a level as
Can you explain
possible.
just briefly what that means? Because for those people who don't know what the carpenter or the washerwoman, what that means, can you describe briefly what that is?
Those are two solo pieces that Decru first made in his very first experimentations with corporeal mime, but then sort of codified into little polished gems in the 1930s, and then taught to certain students over the years.
So you had to be selected to carry on the tradition. In other words,
Right. Right.
You had to have permission, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he made always with his students because there was nowhere else he could get actors. He couldn't advertise in the newspaper and say, we need 4 people trained in Etienne Decroux's technique, because there weren't 4 people trained. He had to start with students and train them, and that's what we've all had to do, because we can't just start making work. You have to train the elements first, and then with those elements you make the work.
So first you were performing Decroux's pieces, but then
and then I was trying to make some things of my own, but in the Decroux style. So yes. I did that for 10 years, and it was spectacularly disastrous. It was people really didn't get it, and it wasn't a performance really. When I came to Pomona, I began to have ideas about how storytelling could be combined, verbal storytelling could be combined with some of the movement studies that I had been working on. And so I put together a play called How I Was Perplexed and What I Did About It. Mm-hmm. And it had a lot of things about things that are social things involved in the making of the play, environmental and so on. And I remember performing it for the first time at a little theater in Los Angeles called the Wall and Boyd Theater. It was on the corner of Wall and Boyd. Mm-hmm. And it was right in the middle of these tents of homeless people. Still, after 30 years, there's still homeless people around Wall and Boyd. And suddenly, audiences were responding to my stories. And they were understanding the movement in ways that I didn't understand it sometimes. They were, there's this idea of there being a text on one track and movement on another track. And the movement does not illustrate the text. Mm-hmm. If I say, I love you, it's kind of unnecessary. I can either do it or say it, but to combine the two is extraneous. So I had stories about my growing up, stories about my first jobs, stories about living in the segregated South of Florida, lots of what I found to be interesting stories. And then this, quote, pure movement studies, which were open enough that somehow the audience was able to put together mm-hmm. and make their own connection. And mm-hmm. so I've come to think of audience participation as the audience, somehow there being sparks that would jump from one side, one track to the other track, uh-huh. and a new meaning would emerge. It was greater than the sum of the parts.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Now, you've had companies over the years.
Yeah.
These groups, for example, when you and I were in those festivals in Mexico, I know you had a group from, I think can't remember where you were headquartered, but.
That was Grand Rapids.
Yeah. Would those groups have been doing Decroux manifestations, or would you be approaching something more connected to the social fabric of where you were coming from?
Yeah, no, those were the mixed, the Decroux attempts, we'll call them. Mm. That was in the 10 years that you saw, and you would have seen very clean, very precise, very clearly choreographed, uh, obviously committed work, which I have on video now, and which I'm getting together some archives,
Oh,
various
wonderful.
archives,
Great.
so they're visible. Oh, and on my website, if you look, there's a little section on my website that says video, and there are some videos of performing with a chair and performing with a table
Yes.
and
Uh-huh.
various things, just pure movement. It's just prior to the folding in of the text, which is
Uh-huh.
the next step.
Ah,
Um,
And
so,
where's the work evolved to now? You said a week and a half ago you had done a performance.
oh, yeah,
Where you were?
I was in a sense worried about that because I'm glad you came back to it because I said that performing is teaching and teaching is performance. And since I taught my Zoom class, it was a performance
yes, it was.
of a kind.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
But,
yeah.
so it wasn't a performance as you're
No, I
thinking.
understand what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
but Tom, you know what? You did come around to answering our very first question, which was about the who you think of as the audience, because you were just telling us, you have the text, the stories, and you have the pure movement, and the audience is the one that's bringing it together. So your collaboration, you think of your audience as collaborators in that sense,
I
maybe.
love that. I love that. Yeah, that's great.
I have a question. So you and I have both have spent many years in teaching in a university or a college. And how do you feel the university or a college is set up today to offer what an artist needs to learn an art? I mean, I have misgivings about the structure today. I mean, there's less face time. There's, financial challenges and so forth. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about where the training of a young artist is moving. Is it moving away from a university into private studios, which have always been there, but have not necessarily been at the forefront? But what do you think about what's happened in universities and what the future holds for a young artist in terms
I
of
just,
training?
it's such a rich and complex question.
Yeah.
It's, again, I'm going to have to say it's one by one. There are students who can profit from the experience of an undergraduate or even a graduate MFA program and find work or make work. I'm thinking now of Zoot. I'm blocking on a name, but it'll come.
Or you'll remember
Yeah,
tomorrow.
yeah,
So
yeah.
keep moving.
I'll remember tomorrow. Let me just say I can make it more general. I mean, here it is. The name came in, of course. Erin Christopher, who was one of my first students at Pomona College in the 1980s. She left undergraduate school, BA in theater, and went to work with Goat Island in Chicago. Isn't it called Goat Island?
Yes, that's right. Uh-huh.
She worked with Goat Island for a long time, touring back and forth in the UK and in the USA. And then I guess Goat Island dissolved,
Yeah.
and Karen is now all the time in the UK, married to a Scotsman. So there's a person who found a pathway into performance art and is like, I don't know, what is the percentage of people who can earn their living with performance art? I don't know. It's so frightening. We don't want to know. It's 0.000 something. It's really small. So, but somehow students, if they were theater majors or if they were MFAs, they think that they're ready now to be performers. And I don't know that that's always true. I don't know that it's such a weird combination.
Yeah, in a sense, it's just one little drop in the bucket for the process of learning to be an artist.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
But then on
so
the
maybe
other,
maybe being in a university never was important. Maybe this overall body of experience is what's most important.
But on the other hand, Tom, there's what you said earlier, where you were saying that some of your best students were not the theater students. They were the people that were coming from other departments that were attracted to this work. And I'm sure that whatever they got out of the class, they took into their studies to be a doctor or a math teacher or whatever they pursued.
True.
Yes. Yes. We hope that's true.
Yeah. Did you ever have, were you ever frustrated with the university system or the college experience? Were you ever, or doubted yourself that you should be out there? Or was that, the richness, on the other side, there's the richness of that environment, which is, if you're open to it, there's nothing like it,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you've answered the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. I agree with you 100%.
I'm doing my own therapy there. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's cheaper.
So Tom, you were talking a little bit about working on your getting some videos ready to be seen, and your website. You have this incredible collection of writing. What do you think of your legacy? Do you have an idea of like what you want, how you want to be thought of, what you leave behind?
Oh, I always found those questions rather grim.
Yes, they could be. I didn't mean it that way, though.
Yeah, I know. I know. I know the intention is always very good. I think that first of all, I mean, who can be aware of what what did a person intend in the first place? So you could have either met the mark or missed the mark. I think I have to check back in 24 hours on that.
What advice would you give to a younger artist right now that's interested in decru work or physical theater or theater itself? Or where would you point them if some 16-year-old, 17, 18-year-old came up to you and asked that question? What would you say?
We have a lot of students who get Watson grants. I'm sure you know about the Watson grant for post-undergraduate work, and you get a paid year. I forget exactly how much they give you, but a comfortable amount. And you can travel anywhere in the world you want to pursue any dream, any thought, any education that you want. So we've had, 5 or 6 over the last 10, 15 years, 5 or 6 from theater. So young people who have gone to Bali, to South America, to, theater groups, just apprentice for a couple of months with them to taste, to see the larger sphere. And what are people going to do? I mean, people have, we were just talking about a student, Sally and I were just talking about a student who had a very China and a marriage and a child and back into the USA, and a very interesting, variegated path that no one could ever foresee the kinds of different pathways.
What would be the future of corporeal mime or physical theater? I mean, the word mime is a dirty word to some people, or very misunderstood. The word clown has been that way. What does the field need now in this time, the 21st century? I mean, I know back in the day we had a lot of festivals. We had there was even a network TV show by Shields and Yarnell, right? So what is it even necessary for physical theater to be on a more public platform? Will it always be a very mysterious ritual for people who know they want to do it? Maybe that's all that's important, or should it be more public? Or what do you feel about the future of theater.
Physical theater is coming into its own, along with devised theater, co-created theater, group
That's a silly
theater.
word, isn't it? Because wasn't it always that way?
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
Shakespeare, this is just my field. Even Shakespeare was devised theater at one point, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But we're much more aware of it now. I think in the last few years we've become much more
so that's a
aware of
good
it.
thing, you would say.
Yes, yeah, and so I think that um, a Czech friend of mine said all history is synthesis, analysis, synthesis, analysis. So De Croo is a person of great synthesis, of great analysis. And, head from the neck, head and neck from the chest, head, neck, chest, etc. Analyze bit by bit by bit by bit. And eventually, people absorb this work and into performance, and it becomes a synthesis of this analysis and that analysis and so on. And it just keeps going that way, I guess, in history, or according to this view of history, keeps going that way. So I don't know. I think it's a great question. I thank you for posing it.
Yeah. You're a true vessel of energy.
Yeah, yes.
We're really delighted that you are part of this Mime radio show, Tom. Your stories are wonderful, and
Yeah.
all the things that you have brought to the Mime world have been fantastic.
What's some other what in all your travels? Where's one of the most stimulating places you've traveled to where you performed or taught? Like what has magnified itself in your brain as from that experience?
I like Wrocław in Poland very much.
Mm.
That's the Grotowski Center is there.
And why is that?
Because I was such an admirer of Grotowski's work.
Mm-hmm.
And because I saw him perform that work in 1976 in Poland. And then I went back 20 years later and performed in that same spot where I saw him perform. So that was a very important moment.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of there being a good place for, I guess I'm feeling kind of above the fray. I don't know. I think that there are times that I would have advocated for, oh yes, only the French know how to see, or the Italians, or have you seen Pipi del Bono? Have you seen the Italian clown, Pipi del Bono? And look at that wonderful Italian energy and so on. No, I think it's all good. I think it's all good. I love Japan. We love Kyoto. We love Claremont. We have a beautiful garden behind our house. I can see it. I'm looking right out and the beautiful golden shafts of light are coming down. And there'll be a long sort of twilight tonight.
So this leaves one question. Like, Tom, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I think we're going to have to put that on the list. But I'm so thrilled that you guys have invited me, and I'm really touched, deeply touched, that you thought to include me in this really interesting and which feels to me right for the moment. I think that people are in this. Do you know, I thought today we couldn't have had this moment if we hadn't had COVID.
It's true. It's true.
Who would have thought of this? And I love teaching on the internet. I'm not going to take, as I said, as many planes anymore. I'm going to teach everything I know, heart and soul, on the internet. Embrace the enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Well, this is our silver lining of a terrible, terrible tragedy to the world, but that we did figure out this way to stay connected when we were all quarantined and had to stay apart from each other. And that's exactly what happened. This podcast came about because of that. So
yeah, and so maybe there is a kind of a follow up to the podcast where you can do like 2 weeks with James Donlin, or you can do 3 or 4 weekends with Karen Hoyer, all of these different things that.
Well, there's lots of possibilities here. I mean, it's as you know, back in 30, 40 years ago, these events where people would come together were very important for our development and for our knowledge. But now we have something like Zoom, where I think you're speaking about something very interesting. You know, how modern technology can communicate like we did in the past. You know, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And when we talked to Marguerite Matthews, she was the one that was saying, "Did you know that Tom is teaching online?" And I was like, "Tom Leabhart, it's online? That's amazing." That's but it's a wonderful thing. It is.
Well, let's keep it up. Let's keep it up.
Yeah.
We're going to put you on the list. We're going to invite you.
Oh, good. Good.
We'll do something and we'll invite you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. This has been very rich time spent with you, and I'm happy that you're here and that you're continuing the work.
Thank you very much.